allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I thank you again for coming out on this, what could be ominous day. Hopefully we'll have the good weather last for a short time so we can do our entire program for you. We are here today to honor our Revolutionary War patriots from this area. In our small little burial ground over here, the Jenkins Harding Cemetery, lie the bodies of Benjamin and Stukley Harding, who were the first to fall in the days leading up to the Battle of Wyoming. The brothers were ambushed while tending to their crops up further along 92, what is now Route 92. And also along with them were others, the Hadsels, father and son, Gardner, and Quaco, who was a slave who was living in the area as well. They were all savagely killed by the Indians, and well, as far as we know, it was only the Hardings' bodies that were able to be recovered. They were brought back to Fort Jenkins, or Jenkins Fort, and Judge Jenkins said, let's take this little piece of ground that's part of my farmland and we'll bury them here. And this little spot of ground across the street has always been a burial ground from 1778 until today. It has never been anything else. So it's really an original part of our area, and a very historic part, of course. The savage deaths of the Harding brothers were also on the minds of the militia down in 44, who, as they were preparing to leave the fort, on their mind was what had happened to the Hardings. And as they're leaving, they're thinking, remember the Hardings, remember the Hardings. So today we are here also to remember the Hardings and the others who were killed on that day. I know many of you are descendants of the Hardings and Jenkins families, and the Gardners as well, and the Hadsels. If you are a family member, may we ask you to please stand? Thank you so very much. And a reminder to you, we will, as we did last year, if you were here, we took a photo in the cemetery of those who are family members. So if you'd like to participate in that, we would enjoy having you in the photo as well. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you our featured speaker for today. Rich Jenkins is a descendant of Lieutenant John Jenkins, and Rich is a member of the Jenkins Harding Cemetery Board. He's also a member of the Luzerne County Historical Society Board, and has a number of ancestors buried in this cemetery. As long as I've known Rich, he's always been very passionate about collecting anything that has to do with his family history. And whether it be paperwork or information, photos, paintings, artifacts, and today Rich has brought along with him what is possibly what I think is like the holy grail of family memorabilia, and he will be presenting that to you. Rich, welcome.
So welcome everybody. And a big thanks to Mary Portoli, my fellow board member. I first came here when I was 6 years old. My parents would take me to Gravlett's ice cream. Mary probably served me my ice cream cone. And then we would come over to the cemetery and look for Jenkins tombstones. Flash forward 45 years, and I returned to the area, and I started doing some homework. And homework led to collecting, as Mary's put it. And the next thing you know, I've discovered this piece, which is, as I found out more and more, really significant to the area, not only for the sake of the revolution, but how about if I start this off this way? Mary told the story of Benjamin and Stukley Harding that were killed. At the time, Colonel Butler sends out a party, they bring them back. The idea of putting them there out in the field, this was the edge, this was the woods, right here. as they're burying the bodies, the invading Indians and the Tories that were coming out of New York were in the woods taunting the mother. They died like babies, they squealed. That going on, knowing that there's an invading force coming in the next few days, it had to be absolutely terrifying. But for the simple fact that this was the edge of civilization back in 1770 told you how much Pittston has grown. So I brought along my treasure, as Mary puts it. I've been giving several lectures on it the last couple of years. It ties in not only to the area, it ties into Sullivan's campaign. What I've recently found is it actually ties into the Connecticut migration that settled the whole area. At one point, this area was considered Connecticut. If you come down to Stamford, Connecticut, see the shining sea, it came right through this area, and my ancestors migrated out and brought quite a few people out in the process under Connecticut title. After the war, it was considered Pennsylvania by the Continental Congress. Those who could bought their property back, and we obviously done that and stayed. So my lecture today I've divided into three parts. I'd like to talk about Lieutenant John Jenkins, his life before the Horn, the most subsequent meeting that he had when he was with General Washington for 4 days, debriefing him on the Wyoming massacre. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about my attaining the Horn and how it was created. So in this first part, I want to highlight key events and roles that Lieutenant John Jenkins played during the period, and that led him up to qualifying in accepting the position as chief guide of Sullivan's March. And this is where the horn really comes in. It's a campaign horn, as you can see here, but this map that is located on the horn is all of Sullivan's March. And it starts up, and if you look, you can see all of the towns that were points of conflict during Sullivan's campaign. As chief guide, this was his how do I say it, memorial, or his trophy horn, to commemorate the service he had done for Washington's army. So let's go through those events first. He was born in 1751 in Colchester, Connecticut, at Gardner Lake. Now, Mary mentioned three names: the Jenkins, the Hardings, and the Gardners. It was the Jenkins and the Hardings that married into Stephen Gardner's family in Connecticut, and basically the son-in-laws of Stephen Gardner brought their wives and families out here. So hence the name Jenkins Harding Cemetery. The Gardners chose to be buried up in Newton Ransom. They have their own little cemetery up there. So he was the son of Judge John and Lydia Gardner Jenkins. The judge was the principal agent for the Susquehanna Company and leader of the First 40. Now we all know what 40 Fort is. It was actually a group of the first 40 settlers who came out from Connecticut in a period of severe conflict, Indian invasions. The Pennamites, hence the Yankee-Pennamite War, were invading up here trying to claim it as Pennsylvania territory. The lieutenant arrives in the Wyoming Valley in early 1772 at the age of 21. Now he's plucked out of Norwich, Connecticut, the second largest city in Connecticut, and all of a sudden thrown in here with buckskin and a rifle. So it had to be a little different, I would say, coming from a community to the frontier. So in he arrives in the valley, and by October, his name appears on a petition to form Litchfield County, Connecticut. And this is where the Jenkins and the Hardings and these early settlers, they come out as principals or shareholders in the Susquehanna Company. If you were in Connecticut, land is at a premium, and all of a sudden they said, well, listen, Connecticut goes all the way out here. For £2 at the time, you could buy a share of the Susquehanna Company. If you got all your belongings together, your wagon, your material, you could come out here and would be awarded roughly 400 acres if you stayed and settled. So there was a pretty large incentive, and £2 was a pretty good deal, I thought, for 400 acres. So quickly, in 1773, he's appointed to investigate the settlement for any Pennamite living in the Connecticut claim. The Pennamite being those people out of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania saying, no, this is Pennsylvania. So already he's starting to line up all the people in his future that would come into conflict with him. In 1774, he's elected surveyor of highways. So now he knows the territory even better because he's surveyed and plotted the whole thing out. In August of 1775, we're now into the war. Lexington and Concord has started, and every little town across the frontier is now proclaiming either what side, as a loyalist or as a patriot, as we had done. So in 1775, he's elected again to a committee of inspection to curtail Tory activities. So now he's seen the rest of his enemies in the future. Okay, now in October of 1775, he's made ensign in the 7th Company of the 24th Connecticut Regiment. An ensign, it was the 3rd in rank. You would have captain, lieutenant, ensign, and then the army. 1777, he was appointed lieutenant now in Captain Durkee's company. November 1777, was with a small scouting party and captured by Indians near Wyalusing and taken to Fort Niagara for the winter. All the way, no horse, no road, no nothing. Fort Niagara is on Lake Ontario. It's a beautiful old fort. He was thrown in the pit during the winter, left next to the ammunition, and there was obviously no fire down there. So he escapes that next spring on the way to Albany. They were going to take him and trade him for an Indian chief, but the Indian chief had died of smallpox. So he was befriended by one of the Indians. He escapes from roughly Albany, and within 3 weeks, he is back down the Wyoming Valley. He has no clothing, no one recognizes him, and he's bringing back all this information of all the enemy and the Indians that are up in the woods of what we call the Back Mountain in Dallas. So he gets back roughly 3 weeks before the battle and marries his bride, his fiancée, Bethia Harris. It would be roughly 10 days before the battle. So he's come back 3 weeks before. He's severely weakened. He's put in charge of 40 Fort during the time of the battle. So subsequently, he survives, where many did not. He survives and immediately joins Captain Spaulding's company and arrives in Stroudsburg to recruit and gain assistance in fighting back after the invasion. August 1778, with Zebulon Butler, he's sent to the valley to reconnoiter and protect who is left, and also leads a detail to bury the bodies. And as we know where the Wyoming Monument is, that's where several of the bodies have been located. In September 1778, he went on a brief expedition with Hartley against the Indians living in Chemung and Newtown, and they covered 260 miles in 2 weeks. Newtown is roughly Elmira, New York. Up to Elmira and back in 2 weeks, on horseback and foot. So with all this information, I want to get these facts out there, but this is what would lead him to become the guide for Sullivan's March and the Horn. That's the reason for it being here. So I'll go to the next section, and he survives the Wyoming massacre. He's got a lot of information, immediately during the period and immediately after, where the fortifications are, where all the British are settling down and making camp. So Zebulon Butler, Colonel Zebulon Butler, sends him to General Hand in Lancaster. Hand is the commandant-in-chief of the whole northeast portion of the army. Hand recognizes the information that Lieutenant John Jenkins has and forwards him with a letter to General Washington. And in Somerville, New Jersey, there was a containment during the winter. So on April 14th, he meets with Washington for 4 days. And I found all this out. It's in the congressional record. There were 3 people that were interviewing for the job. So at the end of the 4 days, Jenkins was given the position as chief guide. And what he guided was 2 military groups, Sullivan from the south, and Clinton would come out of the west, out of Albany. So he's given 2 generals, roughly 5,000 men, 200 bateaus, and 1,000 mules to go all the way up to, from here in Wyoming, where they would concentrate and get organized, all the way up to Athens and Newtown, New York, where they would build so we're going from here. We're going all the way from Wyoming. This is the Falls Bridge, all the way up through Wyalusing. And this portion right here, I don't know if you can all see this, but this is Athens and Troy. This is where they would build Fort Sullivan. Now, from there, the campaign would go all the way up along Lake Seneca, double back, and come down along Lake Cayuga. The only battle is fought at Newtown, roughly like I said, Elmira. And it's not a large skirmish. Out of the thousands that participated, I think there were roughly 75 British and Indians killed, and maybe a dozen American patriots killed in battle. But what it does was it disperses the Indian force. And then we got to remember they're all stationed out of Fort Niagara up here. Once the Indians are broken, Sullivan's expedition is able to go through each town and village and basically destroy it. Not only the homes, but the crops. What was happening with all these invasions, there was our Wyoming massacre, there's a Cherry Creek Valley massacre, there's a Battle of Oriskany, is the British have decided with the use of the Indians, they can control the whole western frontier and also deny any settlement, and with no settlement there are no provisions to ship back to the army. This was all farmland, and there was nothing, so it was a tactic of theirs. So it was essential, Washington said, was to go out and perform this, I want to say scorched earth policy, and return. Now all of this is done in roughly 2 months, all the way back up and all the way back down. They don't proceed to Fort Niagara, it's too late in the year, and they don't have enough supplies. So while meeting with Washington, Jenkins is introduced to Sullivan. Sullivan is the leading general involved, taking the army north up to like I said, Athens and Troy. At the end of the campaign, the winter hits, and it's stated that maybe 10,000 Indians had gone to Fort Niagara to their ally, the British, for assistance because there was nothing left. And the British locked the door. And that was the real, how do I want to say it, mission and then accomplished by Sullivan's campaign. The last part of my lecture, I go into how I came across the horn. Like Marion said, I collect quite a bit of stuff, a lot of stuff. In reading, I think if you read Harvey's history or the Susquehanna Company papers, which describes the whole the Connecticut claim to the area, it's referenced quite a bit. It's Lieutenant John Jenkins' diary, which he kept from leaving here all the way through the march and back. And it's like the holy grail in the Jenkins family. It was in the family for quite a while. It somehow, I think, broke free in the 50s, 1950, 1960. So I've been looking for it forever. 5 years ago, I'm online, Jenkins Journal, and up pops Jenkins' powder horn. And I looked at it, and it was being displayed at the Dietrich Theater up in Tunkhannock. So I went to the Wyoming County Historical Society, and I asked, like, who's this? Where is it? Who is it? And they said, oh, this individual owns it. I don't want to mention names, but he doesn't want to sell it. He doesn't want to give it to us. But he's part of the Endless Mountain muzzleloaders. So I went out and bought a muzzleloader. I went to the first shoot, and I'm looking for this guy. Wasn't there. I came the next one in February, and it's freezing cold out. So finally we meet, and a good tactic is never show him what you're after. But we talked about the powder horn, and I didn't offer him a price or if he wanted to sell it. It took me 2 more years. And then finally we met again, and he said, Rich, I think I'm ready to sell it. And he's told me how it's bought. It was bought at an auction in Athens and Troy, where Fort Sullivan was, in a home right across from their museum. So at some point, I think that's where the horn was located for a substantial amount of time. If you ever get a chance, they're only open Tuesdays afternoons, but the Athens Historical Society contains a lot of similar history as we have here in the Valley, because it was all considered Westmoreland County at one point in Litchfield, Connecticut. So that's where I found out where the horn came from. All of a sudden we strike a deal, and I have it. Now, at the time, it's called a campaign horn. And the reason it is is it holds 3.5 pounds of powder. And on a campaign such as this, you're gone for 2 months. This horn would rest here. 3.5 pounds of powder is a lot. God forbid it should go off. But the idea was you would have a smaller powder horn with it to load your rifle. But this would be your main supply. And there is no store, no gun dealer to go buy powder. So from there, I acquire it, and I want to learn more about it. I've looked at it, I've examined it, I haven't seen a similar design. I've gotten into some flintlock rifles and collecting and things like that. I went to a couple shows, and I set up an appointment with an authority on the horn. And he tells me that it is early New England. And I asked him how early. He says 1730, 1740. So when I go back to the story of the Susquehanna Company, with the lieutenant and his father, the judge, being principal agents, this horn probably brought the first 40 out. 40. The idea being that it has 3.5 pounds of powder. It took 2 weeks to come from Hartford, Connecticut on horseback out to here. You would stay for several months, plant the next season's crops, and go back. That would be more than enough powder. So when I heard that, I thought it was something that it was supplied to him through the military before the Sullivan's March, and after the march he had it engraved. But from what I put together, I think it served two purposes. I think it served as a powder. It served during the Susquehanna Company's migration, and all of my relatives here would probably have been guided out with this powder horn. After the massacre, I think Lieutenant is looking for stuff, or when he comes back from his captivity, he has nothing. He's looking for, I think he grabs that powder horn out of Fort Jenkins right down the road. And that's what he's going to use during the Wyoming massacre, and then subsequently afterwards. After the battle, or let's say even after the war, we can't quite tell when it was carved. But I've read where he is stationed here from like 1780, the year after the massacre, until right before Yorktown, 81. He goes over up to King's Bridge in New York, and then marches all the way down to Yorktown. I think it was carved somewhere in that period between 1779 or 80 and 81, 82. It wasn't carved beforehand because during next to some of the cities is the word burnt, and that was a record of which towns they had attacked. So it was obviously done afterwards. But that was the most surprising thing for me to find out, that it was early New England, and then it served a two-pronged function, was to bring people out here and then subsequently defend them afterwards. I'm looking for a museum to put it in. I don't think we should do this much longer. At present, I have somebody making a copy of it, so I can still give the lecture and talk about it. But now that they put me on the board of the Luzerne County Historical Society, I might have a new home fairly soon. So that's it. I'd like to have you come up and look at it a little bit. It's here for you to view, and you might have to look through it in glass in a museum the next. Real quick, this powder horn, if I move it, you might want to take a look at this as well. These were Washington's orders, not merely overrun, but destroyed. I mean, I think it's a terrible thing, scorched earth. But it was necessary, and this is how high the order came, and the reason for it to happen. It was part of our Western Front, as they say. But if you look at these dates, they're traveling 20 miles a day, 5,000 men. It's really quite a route. But take a look at that, and you're more than welcome to come up and look at the horn. I think Mary. Helen. Go ahead.
I would like to take this up. Very nicely done, Rich. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank everybody for coming today to support us. In its second year, the First to Fall event continues to be an inspiring endeavor, not just for our community, but to the members of those first patriots who gave the ultimate sacrifice and laid the foundation for what we enjoy on this same ground today. Again, many thanks to our speaker, Rich. Thank you for coming, whose enthusiasm and knowledge has brought to light the Jenkins and the West Pittston first to fall. If you have not seen the iconic powder horn of John Jenkins, please take a moment to view it on your way out for the event that we have coming up following this event in the cemetery. Additionally, I would like to acknowledge our First to Fall committee, who met regularly over the last several years to work on the planning and administration of this event. Mary Portelli, our president of the board, has left no detail to chance. Also, I would like to thank other board members, Tommy Overset, Judy Aida, who is always responsible and comes through with anything printed that goes out. Thank you, Judy. Bill Rowe, who has set up our microphone and our PA system. Thank you, Bill. Carl Rosenkrantz, who had a big hand in today's program but was unable to be with us. We are fortunate to have had help from members of the Wyoming area football team who helped put up our tables and our chairs. Thank you, Wyoming area football team. Also, I'd like to thank Rich from Backstreet Music with our sound system. I would also like to recognize West Pittston Historical Society board members, Jackie Brazina, who is not with us today, Cheryl Butera, who could not be here, but certainly had a hand in many of the activities that went on to prepare for this. Myself, Ellen Quinn, Ruth and Mickey Melberger, whose grounds we all enjoy sitting on and whose tent this has been erected. We really try to make do with everything. We have a electrical cord coming out of their window, so we have this great PA system. So thanks to them as well. I'd like to thank Bonnie Baird, once again, Judy Aida, once again, Mary Portelli, Sherry Emershaw, Bill Rowe again, and John Kearns, who was here much earlier, pushing all this water around. Thanks, John. We can always count on John. I would also like to thank members of the community who have been very generous through time and resources. I'd like to thank West Pittston Tomorrow for their generous contribution, Dion Fernandez with Howell Lucy, the Times Leader, Joyce Insurance, and the Big Top Rental, who contributed the use of this tent and who also is celebrating their 40th year in business. Thank you. I'd like to thank Independent Graphics and the Champy family, who is so supportive of so many things West Pittston Borough does. Garrity Supermarket and Koharchik Construction, along with PPL, who yesterday, in difficult conditions, managed to get our flag at the top of the flagpole. So thank you to PPL. I would also like to acknowledge Mr. John Jenkins, Esquire, whose endowment has been critical in maintaining this cemetery where the first to fall lie. It's fitting that the descendants of one of West Pittston's first residents and whose stockade home, Fort Jenkins, served as a place of refuge for the Harding family and continues to see their sacrifice and perseverance are not forgotten. Thank you finally to the many reenactors of the 24th Connecticut Regiment, including West Pittston's Historical Society board member, Ms. Sherry Emershaw, for providing a living example of what our first to fall would have looked like. As you enjoy walking through the cemetery, please make way to find her and to say hello. In closing, I would just like to add, God bless the souls of our first to fall, and all patriots who have given the ultimate sacrifice in defense of freedom and liberty that we enjoy today. May God bless this garden village of West Pittston. God bless Wyoming Valley, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you for coming.